All right, so AIM 6.2, how did the Cold War impact Berlin, Germany? And we just talked about the do now, so away we go. All right, I'll give you a second here. All right, so a couple of things just to kind of recap some things that we talked about last week when we started this unit. This is basically USA versus USSR. So the USA we know is capitalist and democratic, and the USSR we know is communist and it's a dictatorship. Okay, so these are kind of the two sides of this, and the whole atmosphere of this is there is constant threat of nuclear war. This is basically the USA and the USSR looking across at each other, and they're all standing there with their finger right over the button, ready to launch. And this is really scary because when it comes to nuclear war, you have a much better chance of surviving if you fire first. So there's this anxiety on both sides where if there's going to be nuclear war, each of the sides wants to be the first one to kind of strike first. So that makes it especially scary. So this constant threat of nuclear war between these two world superpowers is what dominates the global landscape for the better part of 50 years or so, 40 years. So we also spoke last week about the idea that capitalism and communism cannot coexist. Capitalism has the factors of production being owned by an ownership class, and communism has the factors of production being owned by, the working class, and both of those things cannot exist at the same time. So, at the end of World War II, Germany is going to be split amongst the Allies. Now, the Allies are USA, France, Great Britain, and the USSR. They were on one side. They were the Allies in World War II. So when they defeat Nazi Germany, Germany will be split up amongst these four countries, seeing as how they were allies in the effort to kind of defeat Germany. Well, the whole thing about Germany is that, especially at this time, Berlin is by far the crown jewel of Germany. So whichever of those four countries controls Berlin really gets the better end of this deal with regard to splitting up Germany as a whole. So they split Germany into four pieces and give each of the nations a piece of Germany. And in addition to that, in order to make it fair, they split up the city of Berlin into four pieces also and give each ally a section of Berlin. Now, the US, France, and Great Britain are all members of NATO, and they are still allies during this time. So this essentially splits the city of Berlin in half. One half that is going to be run by US, France, and Great Britain, and the other half that's going to be run by the USSR. And the tricky part about this is the city of Berlin rests within the section of Germany that is controlled by the USSR. So we can see kind of what this looks like here. So on this map, this is the map on the left is the map of Germany. So you can see each of the four kind of quadrants of Germany, each being controlled by one of the allies. And then what you have on the right is a map of the city of Berlin. Now you can see the city of Berlin lies entirely within the Russian section. And then you can also see on the map how the city of Berlin is divided amongst the allies. US, France, and Great Britain controlling that western part of Berlin, and the USSR controlling the eastern part. Well, this makes things especially difficult for the US, Great Britain, and France, because they now have to govern half of a city that lies entirely within Soviet territory. And this presents unique challenges and obstacles that the French, British, and Americans will have to overcome in order to maintain control of their section of Berlin. All right, I will give you a second here. So, like we said, the entire city of Berlin lies behind enemy lines, so to speak. Okay, and like we said, this is going to make things particularly difficult for the NATO countries, U.S., Great Britain, and France. So we said that Berlin is kind of the crown jewel of all of Germany, and the USSR wants desperately to control all of Berlin, not just half of it. So the USSR decides to make life as difficult as possible for the NATO countries with regard to governing their section of Berlin. So they basically block supply routes through the Soviet-controlled section of Germany and try their absolute hardest to prevent the NATO countries from delivering much-needed supplies to their sections of Berlin. So what is the U.S. to do? The answer is they are going to execute what's called the Berlin Airlift. This is a strategy that the United States is going to use that will enable them to deliver supplies and cargo to their section of Berlin while overcoming those roadblocks and the difficulties that are put in their way by the Russians. So the way it works is everything, essential and non-essential goods alike, are going to be dropped right out of cargo planes into the western half of Berlin. So you could see on the map, the planes approach from the north and the south, fly into Berlin, drop the stuff out of the back of their planes, turn around and hightail it back to friendly territory as quickly as humanly possible. Now, this seems like quite a bold maneuver, and it's very, very effective, actually. In fact, it's so effective that eventually the USSR will give up their attempts to try to blockade and prevent access, and they will eventually start allowing United States, Great Britain, and France into Berlin because their efforts are kind of fruitless. They're failing at their attempt to try to make life difficult. The United States has figured out a way to overcome these challenges, and there's kind of no point in the Russians continuing to pour resources into preventing the U.S. from delivering supplies to Berlin because the U.S. is figuring out how to do it anyway. This is known as the Berlin Airlift, and it's one of the early kind of tensions between the U.S. and the USSR in the Cold War. That's why this particular event is so important. All right, I'll give you a second. So ultimately, the tension and rivalry between the U.S. and the USSR leads to the construction of what is called the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall is a wall that's going to separate the two halves of Berlin. Okay, we said that the western half of the city of Berlin is going to be run by the U.S. essentially, and the eastern half by the USSR. Well, the Cold War is very, very much about optics and perception. So if the US and the USSR are having this kind of sort of popularity contest around the world, and they're trying to get all countries to kind of pick their side, how things look is very, very important. Okay, so if, for example, a lot of people that live in the Russian-controlled part of Berlin decide that life is a whole lot better in the American section of Berlin, and they all get up and move, that's going to look very, very bad. And when it comes time for countries to pick a side, all they have to do is look at the news and watch all of these people fleeing Soviet section of Berlin for the American section of Berlin, and that will tell them all they need to know about which side they should pick. So in order to solve this problem, the Russians decide to build this wall. Okay? They claim that capitalism is a threat to their way of life, so they build the wall to prevent capitalism from leaking over into the communist section of Berlin. But in reality, the wall is designed to prevent people from escaping communist East Berlin and kind of running away to democratic West Berlin. That's really what it's for. And the reason we can tell is because we can see which way the guns are pointed. And that's what we were talking about with the Do Now and why we build walls around cities. A lot of times it's to keep people out, but sometimes it's to keep people in. The Soviet Union built the wall, and they told everybody it was to keep people out. But in reality, the wall is to keep the people in. And like I said, we can tell because we can see which way the guns are pointed. The wall is going to become the global symbol of the Cold War for several decades. It is built right down the middle of Berlin. So a lot of families and friends that, lived just a couple of blocks from each other, all of a sudden find themselves separated by a wall that looks like this. And we could see people kind of peeking through the cracks in the wall to try to get a glimpse of things on the other side. The wall is going to start out as really just kind of a chain link fence, but it's going to evolve over time. You can see these kids playing on it. And even here, we can see concrete and then barbed wire on top, right? We can kind of see what's happening here. The eastern side of the wall that was facing the Soviet section is a cold, drab, kind of ugly looking industrial city. Okay. On the western side that faces the United States section of Berlin, it's a different story. This became the world's greatest graffiti canvas. And the wall isn't up anymore, but you'll be able to see some other footage of it in a video clip we're going to take a look at in a little while. But I'm actually lucky enough. I have a section. I shouldn't say that. I have a small piece of the Berlin Wall on display in my office at my house. It's very small, maybe the size of a silver dollar, and it has graffiti on it because it's from the west side of the wall. But it's nice. It's kind of cool to just be in possession of that little piece of history. So it is one of my more kind of treasured possessions, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. The wall separated families and friends, people that, and families that have grown up with each other over the course of decades and decades, all of a sudden found this wall separating them. And little did they know that the wall was going to remain standing for, almost 30 years. And, people would be estranged and separated from their loved ones for decades, never to see them again in many cases. So it's kind of a profound and kind of really historically significant event for a lot of people.